in the in-between. That's going to sound like just about everything, which it is. I want to start with this sort of really basic idea that when we think about a human life, we can think about it in this way. It starts at some point, it ends at some point, and some things happen in between. Now, in a best case scenario, the interval between birth and death goes well. We say the life goes well. But what does it mean for a life to go well? This is the kind of question that bothers philosophers, but it's also a question that comes with just being a person in the world. You can ask yourself on a daily basis whether you're doing well. When I remember to say thank you to the person who serves me coffee in the morning, even though I haven't had a cup of coffee yet. When I give a class where everything really comes together for my students for the first time. When I make a point of leaving work on time so I can be home to have dinner with my kids and read to them before bed. I might point at all those moments and say, in those moments, I was doing well. Now, it's useful to be able to point to times when things are going well, but it doesn't answer the more fundamental question of what it is for a life to go well as it runs its course. So this brings me to one answer to the question of what makes a life go well, the question that I want to explore and the answer I want to explore with you here today. We might say that a life goes well when it has a good shape. Now, this is obviously a metaphor, right? Lives are in triangles or squares or even dodecahedrons. So what does the metaphor mean? What does it mean to say that a life has good shape? Now, imagine taking out a pad of paper and drawing a line down the middle. On one side, you're going to put the good events that have happened in your life. Everything that's good, better, and best goes on this side. On the other side, you'll put the bad stuff, stuff that's bad, awful, and worst, right? So you can imagine adding things on the good side. A trip that changed the way that you see the world. A graduation day or a wedding day. The day that you open your own business or the day that you welcome your child into the world. Big good stuff. But not all good stuff is big and dramatic. Imagine the summer that you learned to ride a bike and the whole neighborhood grew because you stretched out when you had two wheels underneath you and you could go places you could never go before. It's all good stuff. On the bad side, because no life is all good stuff, there's serious bad stuff. The passing of a loved one. The end of a friendship that's run its course, which has a particular kind of sadness that goes with it. The fall that you fell off your bike and broke your arm. When we look at that, we might think, okay, this is really basic. I've got some good stuff over here, I've got some bad stuff over here, I'll just do the math. And whichever side there's more stuff on is going to be the better thing. Maybe I'll even think about magnitude. The more really good stuff and the less really bad stuff, the better of a shape of the life I'm dealing with. Now that seems intuitive, but it's not going to work. It's not quite as simple as balancing out good events and bad events, and this is because the order that things happen in matters. So instead of a balance sheet, we need a model that respects the way that things unfold through time. One of the things that makes human lives so interesting is that we experience them as unfolding through time. So we can retrieve the past in our memories, we can visit the future in our imaginations, and even when we're living very much in the moment, we have our past with us. The places we've been, the people we've loved, the things we've seen, and we carry the possibilities of the future. Our possibilities, the stories we've not yet told. This means that what we really need to visualize as a model is not a side-by-side comparison, but something more like a graph, where we keep track over time of how things have gone over days, weeks, months, years, or even decades. We want to see not just how much good and bad stuff there is, but the topography of the life as a whole. Once we have that sort of model in view, and you think you can see sort of how a life has gone over time, I want to ask you to ask yourself whether you think you can stand in one moment of that life and make a judgment about whether the whole thing is going well or not. And I want to suggest to you today that that's really hard to do, maybe even impossible. Now, I think there's two reasons for this, so I'm going to start by just saying what I think they are, and then we can work through them in a little bit more detail. The first reason is that how specific events impact a life is very difficult to tell before they happen, so we're not good at predicting how something specific will affect a life, and also while it's happening. So specific types of events can be harder to understand than we realize. The other reason is that death can dramatically alter how we think about a life as a whole. So these are two reasons to think we can't have complete confidence in our judgments about whether a life is going well when we stop and take a snapshot judgment in a single moment. So the first reason, again, when we think about events that seem like they're going to be pure positives or pure negatives in anyone's life, it turns out to be not so clear. So this has already come up once today, but I want you to imagine winning the lottery. And I mean winning the lottery, like the Powerball or the Magic Mega Jackpot or whatever is worth like millions and millions and millions of dollars. More money than you could ever know what to do with. That seems good, right? Which life wouldn't be improved by winning the lottery? You can think about specific good things. You never need to work again. Your children will be cared for financially. You now have the resources and maybe the time to embark on your own program of charitable giving. Those all seem like good things. But always? If you quit your job, you might be losing a routine that gives your life structure and meaning. You might be losing all the friendships that you share with the people who you work with, seeing them every day, having a common purpose. If you keep your job after you win the Magic Mega Jackpot, your coworkers will probably resent you and think you're weird. So your relationship with work, which is a big part of our lives, is going to really change. Your kids might get spoiled and terrible because now you have loads of money and they don't have to work for anything. Or your kids might continue to be absolutely lovely because you're good parents, but all these relatives you forgot existed start ringing your doorbell because there's money. And when you start your program of charitable giving, you might discover that it's actually really depressing and hard not to be able to help everyone who you'd like to be able to help. So winning the lottery, which seems like that should just be a clear positive, might not actually be a good thing overall in the shape of a life. It might cut you loose from the moorings of what made your life yours in the first place. Now, this is not just true of good events like winning the lottery, it's also true of bad events. Consider something like a cancer diagnosis. This looks like the absolute opposite of winning the lottery. In what possible way could that ever contribute to the goodness of a good life? When I was in my 20s, I had a coworker who had survived a rare and threatening form of cancer, and we got this magazine in where we worked, and it had a story in it by another cancer survivor called something like How I Learned to Love Cancer. And he said that if he had written the story, it would have been called How I Kicked Cancer in the Butt. And he used a different word than butt, but this is being recorded. And I thought that was so remarkable that these two people both responded to this challenge that involves sickness and suffering and a loss of dignity in some medical context with strength and love and grit and a way of spinning this into a positive part of their own story. And this is not to diminish the reality of the suffering, but to say if we just looked at the first moment of diagnosis, we might think everything after this will be bad. And that's often not the case. Sometimes something bad happens, and the way it affects the shape of a life is very unpredictable. So when we think of isolated events, even things that seem like they've got to be good or they've got to be bad turn out to be really difficult to predict. The character of Tim McGraw's karaoke standard, Live Like You Were Dying, does all this stuff like skydiving and Rocky Mountain climbing and all that other stuff, only after he finds out that he's dying. The fact that death is around the corner changes things somehow. So this brings me to the second reason, to think that we can't just stop in a moment and say for sure how a life is going, even our own life. It seems like death changes things. Everyone born will die. This is one of these statements your philosophy professors say to you, and you think, well, yeah, that sounds true. Depressing, but true, thanks. It's something we don't like to talk about a lot, because while true, it is kind of depressing. It seems pretty clear that when a life ends, the way that it ends affects how we think about the thing as a whole. Edward Gorey has this book called The Gashley Crumb Tinies that looks like a children's ABC book, but it's not a children's book because every letter is accompanied by a vignette of someone dying an absolutely gruesome death, right? So H is for Hector, done in by a thug. X is for Xerxes, devoured by mice. If you read Xerxes' obituary, no matter what else you would ever remember about him, you would remember that he was devoured by mice. This would cast a shadow back over the life as a whole. And now that might seem kind of unfair, that an event like death, over which we have sometimes absolutely no personal control, should potentially have so much impact on how the shape of a life goes. Dying well is a tricky business, in part because we can never get advice from someone who's done it. But we can nonetheless reflect on what goes into a good death, and how a good death can give the end of a life a graceful instead of a traumatic shape. When my grandmother passed in her 80s, she had planned every detail of her own arrangements, down to the clothes that she would wear to her own funeral. She had this relationship with her own death that involved a lot of thoughtfulness and care for others. Now, we're not always going to be in a position to have time to prepare really positively for something like death and how it's going to change our life story. So what is the punchline here? Try to persuade you that it's hard to stand in the moment and see the whole shape of a life, but that nonetheless we should think about the shape of a life when we ask if it's going well or poorly. There's a silver lining here. We might all be less confident than we were 10 minutes or so ago about our ability to judge with certainty when a life is going well or exactly what makes it go well. Winning the lottery and getting cancer might not be as predictable as we thought they were. But while we should be less confident in our momentary assessments of others and even ourselves, we should also be correspondingly more hopeful about how much our lives might still be up to us. So long as we live, we can change how we live, how we respond to the good events and the bad, how we build on the progress, how we react to the setbacks. In between the first dawn of a new life and the time that darkness descends, we can strive to do better and be better. So I want to suggest to you that one way to live well is to grapple with the question of what it is to live well.